Picture this. It's late, deep into the night, and everything around is still. The kind of stillness that presses on your ears, where even the hum of a refrigerator feels too loud. I'm alone in a house that isn't mine, watching the raindrops trace silent paths down the windows. Outside, the world is dark, drenched by a slow, steady rain, the kind that makes shadows stretch and walls feel closer. Before I go deeper into the story, welcome, and make sure to subscribe to the channel, Echoes of Nightmares, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on any of the future scary tales. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button too. Now, back to my story. At first, it was comforting, that silence, a break from the noise of the world. But as the hours wore on, something about that quiet began to feel wrong, as though it wasn't just silence at all. It was more a presence. The way the air seemed heavier, the way the shadows seemed to press in tighter, like the walls of the house itself were watching. You try to shake it off, tell yourself it's just the mind playing tricks, that you're alone, safe. But somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a whisper, small at first, like a breeze rustling the leaves. And it says something's here with you. It starts out simple, a faint creak in the hallway, a light shuffle by the door, the kind of sounds a house makes as it settles. But tonight, they don't seem so innocent. Tonight, they feel wrong. And as I sit there, in that unnatural quiet, I can't help but feel I'm no longer alone. That in the shadows and the cracks, something waits. The house was old, one of those large, worn-down relics that had seen families come and go, watched generations grow and fade. It was the kind of place that had settled over the years, where every floorboard held memories, and every wall had scars. The walls were tall, painted a pale, washed-out color that almost seemed to glow in the dim light, and they stretched up towards a ceiling decorated with intricate molding, patterns that must have been grand once, now barely visible beneath the layers of dust. I was alone in this house, and with each passing hour, the stillness around me grew deeper, swallowing every small sound I made. There were so many rooms I hadn't even ventured into, rooms hidden behind narrow, creaking doors. It was as though the house was a labyrinth of quiet spaces, each one holding on to its secrets, waiting in the dark. The furniture was sparse, covered in sheets that looked like ghosts frozen in mid-step, caught in time, half forgotten. And then there was the floor. The floors creaked with every step I took, each board bending and groaning, stretching out sounds that lingered long after I'd moved away, as if the house was sighing in response. I couldn't escape the sound, no matter where I went. It followed me, echoed through the empty halls, filling the space with a kind of quiet unease. And then there were the smaller sounds, the ones you don't notice right away, but that slowly crawl into your awareness. The faint ticking of an old clock in a room down the hall. Its ticks hollow, spaced too far apart, each one like a tiny, steady reminder of the time passing. A subtle hum of the old pipes, the occasional drip from a tap somewhere deep in the house. And every now and then, the wind would pick up, brushing against the windows, as if it was whispering something through the glass. But there was something else, too. Something quieter, something I could almost convince myself wasn't there. It was just at the edge of hearing, barely noticeable at first, a soft scratching sound like fingernails on wood, faint but steady coming from somewhere. I couldn't quite place it, and that made it worse. It was all around me, pressing in, filling the silence with a tension I couldn't shake. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself it was just the age of the house, the wind, the rain outside. But with every tick of that clock, every drip from that hidden faucet, the house seemed to close in, pulling tighter around me, making the shadows feel deeper, the silence heavier. Each time I listened closer, I found myself becoming more aware of how alone I was. It wasn't just loneliness, either. It was a vast, echoing emptiness, as though the house itself was swallowing me up bit by bit. Time became difficult to track in that space. The minutes seemed to stretch, each one pulling longer than the last, punctuated by the slow, relentless ticking of that clock. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, louder than any other sound, and I realized I was holding my breath, as if waiting for something, as if listening, hoping not to hear what I thought I might. And then, just when I thought the silence couldn't get any thicker, when I felt like I couldn't bear it a second longer, there was again a creak. But this time, it wasn't from me. This time, it was just a few feet away, as if someone had shifted their weight just outside the door. I told myself it was just an old house. Old houses make noises. They breathe, shift, settle. It's natural. But the sound I heard, low, slow, deliberate, didn't feel natural at all. It was a soft, measured knock, almost like someone testing the wood. It came from somewhere down the hall, faint enough that I could ignore it if I tried hard enough. I paused, straining to listen. My heart pounded, each beat echoing in my ears, almost louder than the sound itself. I took a breath, then another. It must have been the house, the pipes, the rain. I let out a nervous laugh, though no one was around to hear it, and shook my head, trying to shake the tension that had settled between my shoulders. I stood up, stretching, trying to break the spell that silence had cast over me. But as I moved, I felt the air change, like a draft moving through a closed room. I told myself it was nothing, but the sensation lingered, pressing into my awareness. I walked down the hall, my footsteps echoing too loudly on the creaky floorboards. I kept my eyes down, avoiding the reflections in the dusty mirrors hanging on the walls, avoiding any chance of catching a glimpse of something I didn't want to see. Then, just as I reached the end of the hallway, I heard it again, this time louder. A faint, shuffling sound like footsteps but slower, hesitant, as if someone was moving carefully, making sure each step was light enough not to be noticed. My stomach twisted as I listened, standing there in the dim light. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, the kind that warns you when someone is watching. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Instead, I forced myself to move, walking quickly back toward the front of the house. My pace quickened with each step, my footsteps clumsier, louder. And every creak, every sigh of the old boards beneath me sounded like an answer, like something was following me, moving just out of sight. Once back in the main room, I tried to pull myself together, scolding myself for being so jumpy. It was just a sound, an old house full of empty rooms and strange echoes. I convinced myself that was all it was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it, that something in the house had shifted, as if I wasn't alone anymore. I checked the front door, tugging at the lock to make sure it was secure. It held fast. I moved from window to window, looking out into the rain-soaked yard, searching for any sign of movement. There was nothing, just the endless patter of rain and the occasional gust of wind bending the branches outside. But just as I was about to let out a breath of relief, to reassure myself that everything was fine, I heard it again. A sound so quiet it barely registered, a light tap like knuckles against wood. It came from the back of the house, from one of those dim, dusty rooms that I hadn't dared to explore. I froze, every muscle in my body tense, waiting, hoping it was just another trick of my imagination. But it wasn't. The sound was real, unmistakable, a deliberate, almost hesitant knock. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to move toward the back, though every step felt heavier, more uncertain. Each corner I turned, each doorway I passed, seemed to stretch longer, darker. Finally, I reached the end of the hall, where a door I hadn't noticed before stood ajar, revealing nothing but shadows beyond. I hesitated, gripping the door frame, peering into the darkness. Nothing moved. No sound broke the silence. I swallowed, heart pounding, and backed away, unwilling to go any further. I told myself it was fine, that I'd checked every door and every window, that the house was locked up tight. But as I turned to walk away, the silence broke again, and this time it was closer. A soft, scratching sound coming from right behind that door. But then what was that noise? I stood there in the hallway, heart pounding as that scratching sound continued, steady and relentless. It wasn't loud, but somehow it filled the silence, echoing off the walls, creeping under my skin. I wanted to move away, to put distance between myself and whatever was behind that door. But my feet stayed rooted in place, almost as if the sound had wrapped itself around me, holding me there. Suddenly, the scratching stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its place. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady my nerves, telling myself it was just a mouse in the walls, or a branch brushing against the side of the house. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The sound had been too deliberate, too calculated. Just as I started to turn, the silence was broken by a new noise, a low creak, like the sound of a door slowly opening. My breath caught in my throat as I glanced back toward the hallway. Every door was closed, every shadow still. But the sound continued, long and drawn out, as if something, or someone, was moving carefully, cautiously. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that there was something in the house with me, lurking just out of sight, watching. I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling, and dialed a friend. The ringing seemed to go on forever, each second stretching painfully, but finally, a sleepy voice answered on the other end. "Hello." I tried to keep my voice steady, to play it off like it was nothing, just nerves from being in a strange house. "Hey, sorry to wake you," I said, forcing a laugh. I'm hearing some weird sounds here. Probably just the house settling, but I don't know. It feels different." My friend let out a sigh. "It's an old house, right? They all make sounds. You're just spooking yourself out. Try to relax, okay? It's probably nothing." I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. "Yeah, you're probably right. It's just..." But before I could finish, a loud, sudden thump cut through the air, so loud it drowned out the rain, making my friend on the other end pause. "What was that?" they asked, sounding more alert now. I swallowed hard, glancing around the empty room. I don't know. It sounded like it came from upstairs. Maybe something fell," they suggested, their voice uncertain now. "Maybe," I echoed, but I didn't believe it. The thump had been too heavy, too deliberate. It sounded like someone, or something, had dropped a weight right above me. I ended the call, promising to check in later. But as I lowered the phone, the silence around me seemed to press closer, filling the room with a thick, almost tangible tension. I took a deep breath and moved toward the stairs, each step feeling heavier, more reluctant. The house seemed to respond with me, the floor creaking, the walls whispering as if alive, each sound amplifying the unease tightening around me. As I climbed the stairs, the air grew colder, the shadows longer. Halfway up, I stopped, my hand gripping the railing as a faint rustling sound drifted down from the top of the stairs. It was soft at first, like something brushing against the walls, but it grew louder, more persistent, moving from one room to another. It was the sound of movement, quiet and cautious, but undeniable. My breathing quickened, my mind racing with explanations I didn't believe. I reached the top of the stairs, each step tentative, every shadow a threat. I moved toward the closed door at the end of the hallway, the one I'd left shut. But just as I got close, I caught a glimpse of something, a shadow slipping out of sight, disappearing just as I turned my head. I froze, staring into the dimly lit hallway, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, that my eyes were playing tricks, but I knew what I'd seen. Someone had been standing there, watching me, and had vanished the moment I'd noticed. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to turn around, to get out of the house. But before I could move, the silence shattered again, a heavy, dragging sound echoing from the room behind that door, filling the empty space with a sense of dread I couldn't ignore. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the closed door, my hand reaching out to the knob despite the fear twisting in my stomach. I was frozen in place, every nerve in my body on edge. My mind raced, grasping for an explanation that would make sense, that would calm the terror building inside me. But there was no rationalizing the feeling that had settled over the house like a dark cloud. I could hear the ticking of the clock, sharp and relentless, filling the silence with a rhythm that seemed to taunt me. Each tick felt slower, louder, stretching time as though the house itself was holding its breath. And yet, I wasn't alone. I could feel it, something beyond the shadows, beyond the creaking floors and the whispering walls. The darkness around me seemed to move, to shift, almost as if it had a life of its own. Every shadow grew longer, every corner darker, as if the house itself was watching, waiting. Imagine being alone in a place like this. Imagine hearing every creak, every whisper in the walls, every sigh of the wind against the glass. Knowing that you're supposed to be alone, but with each sound, each strange movement, that certainty begins to slip away. You can feel the weight of the silence pressing in, thickening with something you can't see, but can almost feel. I couldn't ignore the sounds anymore. They were too real, too close. And then I noticed it, a small detail, but enough to send a chill down my spine. The window by the staircase, the one I was sure I'd locked earlier, was now open just a crack, rain spattering against the sill, dampening the floor beneath. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat, my mind racing through all the ways it could have happened. A draft, a loose latch, but I knew the truth. I knew it had been closed, locked tight, just like every other door and window in the house. The rain outside picked up, pounding harder, filling the air with a relentless rhythm that seemed to sync with the beating of my heart. I took a step back, feeling the chill of the damp floor beneath my feet, the cold air seeping in through the open window. My thoughts spiraled, each one more frantic than the last. I wanted to leave, to get out, to escape this place that seemed to close in around me with each passing second. But then I heard it again, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, just at the edge of hearing. It was coming from the hallway behind me, from the shadows that had grown darker, denser, as if something was hiding within them, watching. I whipped around, my eyes darting from one shadow to the next, my mind playing tricks, making me see things that couldn't possibly be there. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that I was being watched, followed. My breathing quickened, each breath shallow and uneven, my skin prickling with a sense of impending danger. The house felt different now, darker, colder. The walls seemed to lean in, the rooms stretching, shifting, as if the house itself was alive, feeding off my fear. I could feel my heart pounding, each beat echoing in my ears, louder than the ticking clock, louder than the rain. I moved through the room, each step slow and hesitant, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The floor creaked beneath me, groaning as if under a heavy weight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I glanced over my shoulder, but the hallway was empty, the shadows still. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Something small, almost insignificant, but enough to send a chill down my spine. There, on the table by the door, was a picture frame I didn't recognize. It was old, the glass cracked, the edges worn, as though it had been there for years. But I was certain I hadn't seen it before. I reached out, my hand trembling, lifting it carefully, holding my breath as I turned it over. Inside the frame was a photograph, faded and yellowed with age. It showed a family, a man, a woman, and a child, all staring into the camera with blank expressions. But as I looked closer, my heart skipped a beat. The faces, they looked familiar, hauntingly so. The man's eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to bore into me, as though he could see right through me. And the child, there was something in her expression, something almost knowing, as though she understood more than she should. I set the frame down, my hands shaking, my mind reeling. I knew, deep down, that something was terribly wrong. That photograph hadn't been there before. It couldn't have been, and yet, there it was, staring back at me, a silent reminder of something I couldn't understand. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room, every shadow now a threat, every sound a warning. The rain outside pounded harder, drowning out everything else, filling the room with a relentless rhythm that seemed to echo my heartbeat. And then, just as I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, I heard it, a soft, deliberate thump coming from the room down the hall. The same room where I'd seen that shadow slipping out of sight. My breath caught, my heart racing as I took a step forward, then another, each one slower, heavier. The hallway stretched before me, dark and silent, the shadows seeming to shift, to move, as if something was waiting, watching. And I couldn't help but wonder, was I truly alone in this house? Or had something been here all along, hiding just out of sight, waiting for the moment I'd finally notice? I could hear it now, footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the floor in the next room. I froze, my body tense, barely daring to breathe as the sound grew closer. Every footfall sent a fresh wave of panic through me. They were here. I knew it without a doubt. Someone was moving through the house, circling me, hunting me. But how could they have gotten in? The doors were locked, the windows secure. I couldn't make sense of it. And yet, the unmistakable sound of steps continued, growing louder as they echoed through the house. The footsteps weren't hurried. They weren't frantic. They were patient, controlled, as though whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. And that thought, that knowledge, sent a chill crawling up my spine. I backed away from the hallway, my breath coming in sharp gasps, my heart hammering in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, but I couldn't move. I couldn't, not with those footsteps moving steadily closer. I found myself retreating toward the corner of the room, pushing my back against the wall, trying to melt into the shadows, to become part of the darkness itself. My eyes darted around the room, looking for any place to hide, any escape. But there was nothing, no way out. The windows were too high, the doors too far. The air in the room was thick, heavy with fear, and I could feel the walls closing in on me. The rain outside rattled against the windows, drowning out any chance I had to hear anything clearly. Each sound I made, every breath, every twitch of my muscles, seemed amplified in the silence, betraying my position. I held my breath, my chest tight, fighting to stay still, my ears strained, searching for any sign of movement. For a moment, the house was still, eerily quiet. The storm outside roared louder, a low rumble of thunder shaking the house, but even that couldn't drown out the tension in the air. Then, without warning, there was a creak. It came from above, the floorboards groaning under the weight of footsteps. Someone was on the second floor, moving slowly, methodically, as though they were searching, looking for something or someone. I felt my pulse quicken, my skin crawling with the sense of being hunted. There was no hiding from this, no escape. My eyes scanned the room again, desperate to find a way out, but everything felt suffocating. The darkness was all-encompassing, pressing in from every corner, making the room feel smaller, narrower. I had no choice. I had to move. I had to get out. But where? How? The footsteps above stopped. For a moment, everything was still, and I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. My breath came faster now, shallow and ragged, the air feeling thicker with each passing second. My legs were weak, trembling beneath me as I fought the urge to scream, to run. But I knew it wouldn't matter. I was trapped. I peeked out from the corner, cautiously, slowly, trying not to make a sound. The hallway was empty, nothing out of place, but that didn't make me feel any better. The house had become a maze, and each room, each corner, held more danger than the last. The footsteps had stopped, but now it was worse, silence. The kind of silence that was louder than any sound, as though something was waiting, biding its time. And then I heard it again, a soft rustling, barely audible, but unmistakable. The sound of something brushing against the walls, moving through the house, searching. What would you do if you were alone, hearing footsteps in the dark? I was frozen. I could feel my legs trembling beneath me, my mind scrambling for a plan, for an answer, for a way out of this nightmare. But there was no answer. There was nothing. The storm outside roared, the rain pouring in torrents, but it felt as if the house had become its own world, separate from everything. Outside was a distant memory, a far-off dream. I was here, alone, trapped. The footsteps returned, louder this time, closer. Whoever was upstairs was moving again. The air around me seemed to thicken with their presence, pressing against me, pushing me down. I dared not move, dared not even breathe, as the figure, whatever it was, grew closer. I could almost hear its thoughts, feel its intentions, as though it was aware of my every move, every breath. The seconds stretched into eternity. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but all I could do was stand there, waiting, listening to the slow, deliberate steps moving through the house. What if they knew I was here? The question lingered in my mind, chilling me more than anything. What if they were just waiting for me to make a sound, to give myself away? And then, without warning, the door to the room, my room, creaked open, just a crack. I could feel my blood run cold, my throat tightening, as I dared not move. Through the narrow opening, I could just make out the shadow of a figure, standing motionless, watching me, its presence more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. I didn't know how much longer I could stay still. I was running out of time. I could feel the walls closing in, the air thick with fear, and the darkness closing around me. Would I survive this? Or would I become just another whisper in the silence of this house? It was too late to run, but maybe, just maybe, I could hide. I couldn't breathe. Every inch of my body screamed at me to run, to escape, but the paralyzing fear kept me rooted to the spot. The door, my door, was wide open now, the figure standing there, unmoving, as though it had been waiting for me to notice. I felt my heart slam painfully in my chest, each beat echoing louder than the storm outside, my blood roaring in my ears. It was the thing that had been haunting me all night, the source of the footsteps, the rustling, the cold chill that seemed to seep into my very bones. It wasn't human, at least not anymore. I couldn't explain what it was, what I was looking at. The figure standing there was tall, its shape shifting in the dim light, but there was no mistaking it. The eyes, black and endless, stared at me through the shadows. A coldness emanated from it, a suffocating chill that froze me to the spot. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. My legs felt like lead, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the table for support. I could feel its presence growing stronger, like an invisible force closing in around me. It took a step forward, and I couldn't hold back any longer. Every instinct screamed at me to run, and this time, I did. I bolted for the door, stumbling over my feet, barely able to keep my balance as I raced through the dark house. The storm outside had grown deafening, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, the frantic rush of my breath as I darted through the hallways, my feet slipping on the wet floor. I reached the back door, the one I had locked earlier, but the lock was now undone. My fingers fumbled, the cold metal sending shockwaves of panic through me as I tried to push the door open. It wouldn't budge. It felt as though something heavy was pressing against it, holding it shut. My hands were slick with sweat, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I yanked harder, desperate, but it wouldn't move. Behind me, I could hear it, soft footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving closer. I turned, my heart sinking as I saw the figure again, standing in the doorway, watching me. The darkness around it seemed to swirl, to pulse, as though it was made from the very shadows of the house itself. I pushed against the door with every ounce of strength I had, and finally, it gave way. The door creaked open just enough for me to slip through. But as I did, I glanced back one last time, unable to resist the urge to look. What I saw sent a jolt of terror through me. The figure was still standing in the doorway, but now its face was wrong. It was distorted, the features shifting and warping, as though its very existence was a mockery of reality. The eyes, those dark, endless pits, seemed to lock onto mine, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the house. I didn't hesitate. I ran into the night, the storm pelting me from all sides, the air thick with rain and fear. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just had to get away from that house, away from whatever it was that had been stalking me. I ran and ran until my legs gave out, until I could no longer hear the pounding footsteps, until the oppressive weight of the house was just a distant memory. But as I stumbled into the safety of the streetlights, a fleeting glance over my shoulder made my blood run cold. There in one of the windows, I saw it again. The figure. It was standing there, watching me, its face still twisted and wrong, its eyes locked onto mine, even from so far away. And just as quickly, it vanished, melting into the shadows, as if it had never been there at all. I stood there, frozen in place, my breath coming in short gasps. My mind reeled, my body trembling with the cold, the fear, the overwhelming terror. What had I just seen? Was it real? Had it been real? Or had I been trapped in some waking nightmare that wouldn't let me wake up? I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the empty house, but when I finally turned to leave, something caught my eye. On the ground, just beneath the streetlight, was something strange, something I couldn't explain. A symbol. It was drawn in the dirt, crude and uneven, but unmistakable. A circle with a jagged line through the middle, like a twisted, distorted version of a smile. I couldn't help but reach down, my fingers trembling as I traced the shape. What did it mean? Who had left it? Before I could answer myself, the rain picked up again, harder this time, as though urging me to leave, to forget everything I had just witnessed. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something else, something metallic like blood. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. I ran, and I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my own home. But even now, as I sit here, the memory haunts me. The image of that figure, its twisted face, those eyes staring at me from the shadows. And that symbol, what did it mean? The house is empty now, or so I believe. But something inside me tells me I'm not the only one who escaped that night. That whatever was left behind in that house, it's still out there, watching, and maybe it's still waiting for me. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that happened that night, I can't shake the feeling that the house wasn't just a place I was trying to escape. No, there was something else there, something I didn't fully understand, something that had been waiting for me, watching, just as I had watched it. Sometimes we convince ourselves that we're alone, but are we? Have you ever been in a room, perhaps alone in your own home, and suddenly felt the weight of someone's gaze? The hairs on the back of your neck standing up, your heart racing. Yet when you turn around, no one's there. Have you ever felt as though the silence was too silent, as if it were hiding something just beneath the surface? Maybe there's a reason we feel that way. Maybe, in our deepest moments of solitude, we aren't alone at all. Now, I want you to think back. I want you to ask yourself, have you ever felt watched, even when you were all by yourself? What do you think it means when those sensations creep in? Could it be the remnants of a past presence, a lingering energy, or something far darker? And what if, just like in my case, something unseen was always there, waiting for you to notice it? I'm not the only one who has faced that kind of fear. You're not the only one. Many have experienced the strange sensation that they're never truly alone, and many have lived to tell strange, chilling stories like this one. So I ask you, have you ever had a moment when the walls around you felt alive? If you have, I'd like to hear about it. Share your story with me in the comments below. Maybe you've experienced something similar, or maybe you've heard stories that are even more unsettling. Let's talk about it. Let's unravel these mysteries together. And if this story left you with chills, if you found yourself questioning the safety of your own home tonight, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales, and share it with someone who might just be curious, or brave, enough to listen. The world is full of dark corners, things we can't always explain. So stay alert, keep your eyes open, and always listen to that little voice in the back of your mind. Because sometimes it's trying to warn you.